But Jesus said he saw the faith of his friends. So we talked about how important it is to have friends in our life that bring us to the supernatural. And then tonight we're doing supernatural servants, which is part 2. And our key verse is Mark 10:45. For the Son of Man did not come expecting to be served by everyone, but to serve everyone and to give life as a ransom price in exchange for the salvation of many. Think about that. I want to talk to you tonight about the lifestyle of a servant and what that actually looks like, and how that attitude of servanthood will create a lifestyle of the supernatural. If you and I want to be part of the supernatural, we've got to learn to live a servant's life. We've got to learn to live like a servant. All throughout the Bible, if you go all throughout the Bible, you'll see that servants were in the mix of the miracles. If you go throughout the Bible, you'll see that the servants were all in the mix of the miracles. And every time there was a miracle, you can identify a servant, because servants live the supernatural. And even more notable throughout the Bible, you can see that Jesus was part of the supernatural. He was the greatest servant known to man. And here's a fact: the highest level you and I can ever be is a servant of God. The highest level we can have is to be God's servant. There's a picture that it shows a Batman, 3 Batmans and a Robin. And the Batmans all have different color outfits. So one Batman has black, one has black and blue, and one has gray. And then there's a little Robin sitting in the middle. And it says, everyone wants to be Batman, but very few people like to serve like Robin. And I thought about that. I thought we all have Batman times in our lives, but do we ever really serve like Robin? And so I want you to think about what it would be like to serve like Robin. And with that, I will tell you this: the Bible mentions servants over 700 times, and the Bible mentions leaders less than 20. Over 700 times. God is able to accomplish the supernatural without our help, yet he chooses to include us if we're willing to serve with him and to be part of the supernatural. I want to take you through 5 really neat Bible stories, and I'm going to show you how that God used servants to be part of those miracles. The first one I want to show you is Naaman's, the servant girl that took Naaman right to the miracle. Now, there was a lot of servants involved in this. So Naaman's a commander of the army of Aram. He's a valiant soldier. Girl, here she is. And she's part of Naaman's life. She's Naaman's wife's servant girl. Now, Naaman's a commander in a big army in Aram. He's a valiant soldier. He's highly regarded with great favor from the king. And Naaman's army from Aram has raided Israel and taken this little girl in as a servant. And she's captured. She's been taken from everything. She's gone from beans and cornbread to pork chops and fancy things, and her whole life has changed. She doesn't even see her parents anymore. Can you imagine the opportunity to be bitter? I would have a hard time not being. But Naaman, he's got a problem. Naaman has leprosy. It's an incurable disease. It's worse than COVID. Eventually, people, if you have COVID, will start coming around you again. But if you had leprosy, you could not touch anyone, and you were alienated for life. He had to stay a certain amount apart. But a servant girl went to her mistress, which was Naaman's wife, and she said in verse 3 of 2 Kings 5, verse 3, she said to her mistress, "If only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of leprosy." So the servant girl amazes me, because not only is she a servant girl, she honors her authority and she wants what's best for him. She wants what's best for him. She starts the supernatural miracle for Naaman's journey. So Naaman goes to the king, and the king sends a letter to the king of Israel. And eventually they connect him to Naaman, to the prophet Elijah. And Naaman goes to his home, and Elijah sends out a prophet. I mean, just imagine that. Elijah doesn't even want the credit. He's got the power to heal through the anointing of Jesus Christ, and he doesn't even want. He knows it's God. So he sends a servant out, and that's in 2 Kings 5, 9, and 10. So Naaman went, next slide. So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elijah's house. Elijah sent a messenger to say to him, "Go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed." Think about it. And he says to the servant, "There's so many beautiful rivers where I live. Why would I want to go to the dirty Jordan River?" But by some miraculous thing, he listens to the servant, and he does it. So we continue the story in verse 13. Naaman's servants went to him and said, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do something great." Now this is Naaman's servant now saying, "Hey, if he told you to do something great, you would have done it. How much more if he tells you to wash and be cleansed? That's easy." So Naaman goes and dips himself in the Jordan 7 times as the man God had told him. And his flesh was restored and became clean like a young boy. Think about this story. There are servants all around the miracle. Servants ignite every single part of this miracle. This servant said, "What's it going to hurt?" And Naaman listens to him, and he's completely made whole. Now, Naaman goes back with all kinds of luxurious things and gold and silver and wonderful gifts to give Elisha. And Elisha sends the prophet, his servant, out again and says, "No, I don't want anything. God gets the glory." So what did Naaman do? He said, "Well, give me some dirt so I can take it back and I can build an altar." So you know what happened? I guarantee you, Naaman and his wife became believers in the Lord Jesus Christ. And so did so many of those people that serve in their camp, because one servant started it. The bottom line, servants are always in the supernatural. Now let's go to servant story 2. I love this one. The servants filled the water jugs and served the guests. So here's the scene. Jesus has not performed any miracles yet at this time, and weddings were a huge deal. So at this wedding feast, it was in the village of Cana in Galilee, and Jesus was there, his mothers were there, and all the disciples were there. Now they had not seen him do any miracles yet, so they were still just trying to check Jesus out. And Jesus is having fun. He's a 30-year-old man just having a good time. And all of a sudden, the wine runs out. And Jesus's mother, I don't know if she was a busybody or she was just she had the gift of helps, but whatever, I love her. And she goes to Jesus to try to make the story straight. So we look at it in John 2, 3 through 4, the next slide. "And when they ran out of wine, the mother of Jesus said to him, 'They have no wine.' But Jesus said to her, 'Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour has not yet come.'" This is one of the most hilarious things in the whole Bible to me. Jesus shows us humanity here, and he says, "Mother, stop pushing me." And the King James Version, it says, "Woman, it's not my time." He's saying, "Don't boss me, don't nag me. I'm a grown man. Please don't push me." But Jesus's mom turns and tells the servants to do it anyway. You know what? I find it interesting. Actually, I was having a conversation with Elizabeth Robinson and my mom about this 2-3 weeks ago. Jesus's mother knew right where to go for the miracle. She was relentless. She was not letting go. She wanted that miracle for those precious people. And Jesus is going to respond. Why? Because she does all she can in the natural, so he does what he can in the supernatural. It says in verse 5, Jesus's mother says to the servants, "Whatever he says to do, go do it." Next slide. "And Jesus said to the servants, 'Fill the water pots with water.' And they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them," who is them? The servants, "Draw some out now and take it to the master for the feast." And they took it. We go on in verse 9. "When the master of the feast had tasted the water that was made to wine, and did not know where it had come from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew." Jesus sends the servants to show the miracle. He's not even around it. He uses servants. The servants knew. The master of the feast called to the bridegroom. This was the beginning of the signs of Jesus in all his glory. I love this story because the servants are the ones that see it turn into wine. They're the ones that serve it. They're the ones that are involved in the party. They're all over the mix. But I also find it interesting that Jesus's mother wanted to serve and help the family that had a problem, but Jesus turns around and serves too. Now, his mom said, I need you to do something about this problem. And Jesus said, "Woman, it's not my time." And then he turns around and does what she asked him to do. Why? I truly believe it's because he had not done any miracles yet. He had not launched his ministry. So he was still under her spiritual authority in her home. And so Jesus honored his mother's spiritual authority. And that launched his ministry and became such an incredible miracle in the Bible. I've learned a lot about leadership and also honoring spiritual authority. And one thing I've learned for sure, if it's not a sin, I don't care if it makes sense or not, just do it. Just do it. When we honor our spiritual authority and we become servants and we submit, God will take us to supernatural miracles. Story number 3. This is the master servants. Now, this is a prodigal, and this is Jesus's height of his ministry, and he used parables, a lot to teach life lessons. And this story of the prodigal son is in Luke 15. So it's the story of, I want to just talk about the father and the young son and the theme. The father is a forgiving father whose character remains constant throughout the story. A father who's a picture of God who loves us even when we are lost. We even have days as Christians that we feel lost, and we just need our Father to wait for us. And this younger son, of course, symbolizes the lost. And the theme is the restoration and love of the Father. Now, the younger son is going to his father. He probably has not earned his right to even be anywhere close to his inheritance. But he goes to his father in rebellion, and he says, Dad, I want my inheritance. The inheritance didn't go out to anyone until the father had passed in those days. So basically what the son was saying is, I want my inheritance, and you can't die fast enough. So I want you to give it to me. So it broke the father's heart. And the boy runs off, and he's out of Happy Valley, and he's into the Big Apple, and he's eating pork chops and drinking all he can and having the best time of his life. But finally, he squanders everything. And he realizes that the father's servants have what even better than he has. So we're going to read in Luke 15, 17 through 19. When the young man came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. The young man knew that even the servants were blessed because they honored that young man's father. So verse 20, so he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way away off, his father said to him, his father was full of compassion, and he ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and he kissed him. I love the father's heart here. I want you to think about this. No one of any error in those days, whether you're wealthy, middle class, or lower class, you did not run unless you were a servant. You did not run. This father had a lot of money, and he had to literally take layers of clothes off of him to be even able to run. He was willing to run. I imagine the servants probably helped him take those layers of clothes off, but most likely those servants were around. But I find it interesting that young man comes back, and what does he come back as? He comes back as a servant's heart. But the father's been waiting on him. He looked and waited on him and waited on him and waited on him, because the father also had a humble servant's heart. And that's what put them back together. Let's go to Luke 20, verse 21 and 22 of Luke 15. Then the son said, Father, I was wrong. I've sinned against you. I could never deserve to be called your son. Just let me be. The father interrupted and said, Son, you're home, just like our heavenly Father does. Don't worry about it anymore. Turning to the servants, the father said, Quick, bring me the best robe and my very best clothes and everything, and I will put it on my son's shoulder, and he is my sonship. There they are, the servants again, restoring that young man. But the father, remember, the father also became a servant heart, and so did the son. What's the story here? Wait patiently. God waits patiently on us. He's on our time, really. He waits on us and waits on us and waits on us like a servant for us to come back, or us to learn that lesson over and over again, or to get things right, because that's what a good God he is. No matter how far we are off, the Father in this story, just like our Father God, has a servant heart waiting on us. Story number 4, the serving of the thousands, 5,000 actually. I love this story. It's in all 4 Gospels of the Bible. It's been a long day. It's been supernatural miracles, healings, and all kinds of ministry. The disciples in the modern day would have had all the contact information, all the emails, everything you could ever want. And they see a problem. It's getting late and nobody has eaten. The disciples come to Jesus with the problem and a plan. But Jesus didn't want them to come with a natural problem and a plan. He wanted to do something very supernatural. It had been a long day and none of them could believe. But there was this little boy that had 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish and a basket lunch. And that little boy was prepared to be part of a miracle, even when those godly men weren't even ready to understand what it was. But I also find it interesting. I want to know this when I get to heaven. Who packed that lunch for that little boy? Was it a big sister? Was it a mother? Who was it that knew, hey, don't go out of the door? Preteen young man, don't forget your lunch. You're going to need this for something. You're going to need it. And that little boy gives that lunch to Jesus. Now here's the next thing. The boy's a servant. The mom or whoever packed the lunch is a servant. But this young man did not need a miracle from Jesus because he already had what he needed in his hand. Yet he became a servant because he was equipped to be part of a miracle of Jesus for others that did need it. He gave what he had in his hand so that Jesus could use that supernaturally. He gave everything in the natural for the supernatural. The little boy became a channel and an avenue, a blessing for others that really needed to be fed. If you and I will trust Jesus with only what we have in our hand, some of you may feel like everything's okay. Others of us may feel like, man, I only have what I have in my hand. I do know this. If we will trust that our servant Jesus with all we have and give him back our servanthood, all that we have in our hands, it will be in just a small matter of time. We will begin to trust him with our entire lives. Take one step at a time. Trust him little by little. Serve him little by little. And you'll become one of the greatest servants. What am I saying tonight? Give Jesus your lunch, what you have in your hand. And the last Bible story, story number 5, supernatural story number 5. The servants roll back the gravestone and unwrap the grave clothes. I love this scene. You know, it's only a 2-mile difference. Let's go to the next. It's only 2 miles from Jerusalem, where Jesus is, to Bethany. Now, that's not a very far walk. I did more than that earlier today, but the terrain was different. But any logical sense, it's still not too far to get there before Lazarus dies. We'll never know why Jesus didn't get there before he died. It'll be a mystery, but that was the distance. Now, the friends had come from all over to console Mary and Martha because their brother Lazarus, go ahead and show the next slide. Their brother Lazarus had passed away. And you can see a picture of Martha here. I love these images from freebibleimages.com. Martha says, Jesus, if you'd have been here, my brother would have made it. And then Mary comes back and says, Jesus, if you would have been here, my brother would have made it. Jesus has such a servant heart here, girls. You know what it says in the word? It says he literally cried with them. He cried with them. He got right on their level and he was touched by it. It moved his heart. But then the supernatural kicks in and we get to the good part of the story. John 11:38-40. Then Jesus, with intense emotion, came to the tomb, a cave with a stone placed over its entrance. Jesus told them, who's them? The servants. Roll away the stone. Then Martha said, but Lord, it's been 4 days since Lazarus has died. By now his body is already decomposing. Jesus looked at her and he said, didn't I tell you that if you will believe in me, you will see God unveil his power? Hey, remember that right there. The Lord prompted me to memorize this right here, verse 40. Didn't I tell you, Christy, that if you will believe in me, you will see my unveiling power over your life? We need to remember that. If he can raise Lazarus from the dead, do we know that he can raise anything in our lives from the dead? We'll continue with verse 41. So they, who's they? The servants, rolled away the heavy stone. Jesus gazed into heaven and said, Father, thank you that you have heard my prayer, for you listened to every word I spoke. Now, so that these who stand here with me will believe that you have sent me to this earth as your messenger, I will use my power you, Father, have given me. Then with a loud voice, Jesus shouted with authority, Lazarus, come forth. And Lazarus came out of the tomb. Then in front of everyone, Lazarus, next slide, who had died 4 days earlier, slowly hobbles out. He still had grave clothes tightly wrapped around his hands and feet and covering his face. Jesus says to the servants, unwrap him and let him loose. He said it to the servants. They unwrapped him. They were the closest to the miracle. And from that day forward, many came to visit Mary and believe. Now, this miracle only happened just a few days before Jesus went to the cross. Think about how incredible this is. Listen, they wrapped him so tight that even if you were alive, you could not have gotten up and walked. It is truly a supernatural miracle. Dead bodies were wrapped in long strips of cloth in a way that restricted their limbs completely to make them straight. And the head was wrapped so tight that the mouth would stay closed. it was humanly impossible. So Lazarus raising up from the dead is a supernatural miracle. But what also is supernatural is the servants. Why did Jesus, I mean, he brought him out from the grave. He said, why didn't he just say, servants, stand out of the way, I'll take the grave clothes off? He was capable. Why did he command the servants to help? Why? Because Jesus over and over again includes the servants, includes his followers in the supernatural, and allows us to be part. See, Jesus says, takes me to the tomb, to the followers and the servants. Yet Jesus knew where the tomb was. Then Jesus says, roll away the gravestone of Lazarus. Yet Jesus could have done that himself. Jesus says for the servants to take off the grave clothes. Yet Jesus could have done that so easily. Instead, he included the servants. He included his followers into the supernatural so they would understand his power and authority and understand that he would use them in so many great ways. Can you imagine being a servant in that day? Can you imagine being a disciple in that day, a follower? He wants us to be like that even now, for us to be in a tangible way part of his supernatural, to partner with Jesus in ministry. Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, but he used servants to help wrap him out of the clothes. I want to transition to a final story of my great-grandmother. My mother was about 15 or 16 years old, serving like Mamaw, the least of these. So this is Mamie Delfaus, my Mamaw, who I never met. But I wrote a book and I dedicated it to her, actually, called The Perfect Dinner Guest. And this lady was incredible. Now, in the early 1960s, she was a senior member on staff at a church called Oak Cliff Assembly of God. That is unheard of. Women are not on staff back in those days, but she was. And she was in charge of all the prayer ministry. And on every Tuesday, she would do a prayer gathering, and the men that were retired and all the women at the church would go. So it would be tons of people that would come and pray. And she would serve and pray and prepare all week long. And then after they would pray, they would have a meal together. And she would serve the meal, and they would have a meal together in the fellowship hall. On this particular Tuesday, the lady that actually is still alive with us today in her upper 90s, she's very cognizant and sharp as a tack, Casadine. Casadine was younger. She was in her 20s, and my great-grandmother was in her early 60s. I think she was about 62. Casadine went back after the prayer meeting, after the lunch, and sat down at the table at the reception desk of the church, and Sister Noah, Brother Noah's wife, that was the pastor's wife, sat across on this pretty sofa, and they were just sitting there talking and conversing about the day, and Mamaw was nowhere to be found. They said, well, I wonder where Mamie Faust is at. And just right around the corner, here she comes. And my great-grandmother, maybe, she sits down on the sofa right next to the pastor's wife and across from Casadine. She puts her head back and she goes to be with the Lord. That's the end of her life right there. Well, come to find out, the janitor, who was also the pastor's son, happened to know what my great-grandmother was doing those few minutes before she went to be with the Lord. He was a janitor, and he had walked in and saw her. She didn't know he saw her. And she had been walking back the long way from the fellowship hall after lunch and after prayer. And she decided for some reason to get on her hands and knees and clean the children's nursery. And he saw her literally cleaning the children's little potties, cleaning on her hands and knees those little potties. That wasn't her job. She was a pastor. She was not the janitor. That's the last thing she did. At her service, it was on a Friday. It was an incredible time to be together. I heard the service was great. But on Sunday night, the church, the large church, they were very sad because they had lost my great-grandmother. They had lost a great woman of God, a prayer partner. But there was a message and interpretation, and there was a message and a gift that came. And it said this. I learned this from my mom, who was there. It said, Mamie Faust came to me rejoicing. She did all that I asked without a whimper. Her mantle was too heavy for one, so now I'm going to pass it out among you. That's a servant. I can't hardly tell that story without crying. I want to serve like Mamie Faust. It reminds me of this wonderful, beautiful, beautiful verse. It's Matthew 25:37-40. Then the godly will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty and give you food and something to drink? When did we see you with no place to stay and invite you in? When did we see you poorly clothed and cover you? When did we see you sick and tenderly care for you? Or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, don't you know? When you cared and served for the ones that were least important of these my little ones, my true brothers and sisters, you demonstrated your love for me. Oh, it's so good to serve. When we do all we can in the natural, and we serve with everything we have in our life, next slide, God, he responds with the supernatural. We don't have to have all kinds of authority and power. We do because we serve Jesus. But all we have to do is go on day by day and serve others. It will open supernatural doors. My challenge tonight is easy. You and I, we're truly the hands and feet of Jesus. Will you serve like Robin? Not Batman. Everybody wants a Batman suit. Robin was the server. Will you serve like Mamma Faust? Will you serve like Jesus? That's a lifestyle of a servant that brings us to the supernatural. See, we are truly the hands and feet of Jesus when we serve. God doesn't need us to complete the supernatural. I've proved that over and over tonight. Yet it's a pattern that God does use his servants over and over in his supernatural miracles. Creation was supernaturally spoken into existence. Yet God uses us to take care of his creation every single day. Supernatural healing took place in the Jordan River when Naaman went down 7 times. Yet God required Naaman to listen to the wisdom of servants and to do the work of dipping. God provided the very best wine for the wedding banquet supernaturally. Yet the servants were the ones to fill the water jugs and to serve the miracle wine to the guests. And the individual lunch basket of bread and fish was supernaturally multiplied by Jesus Christ. 12 baskets left over, probably because the disciples were serving all day and they needed some food. Yet Jesus used the disciples to serve that meal and the leftovers. God commanded a 4-day-old Lazarus to supernaturally come forth from the grave. And who did he use to roll the gravestone away? Who did he use to unwrap the burial clothes? The servants. God never needs your help. He doesn't need my help. Yet he chooses to use us over and over in the most supernatural way for the most supernatural miracles. This is ministry. Ministry is not, it sometimes is a pulpit. I love pulpits. It's good, but big time ministry is serving. Sometimes ministry is a microphone. Most of the time it's not. Ministry with Jesus is best known, saying, come alongside, help me help the ones I love. It's the servants who are always around the supernatural. And if you will be a servant and I will be a servant, we will grow in ways and live a life of supernatural like we have never before. I close with our theme verse, Mark 10:45. For even the Son of Man did not come expecting to be served by everyone, but to serve everyone and to give life as a ransom price in exchange for the salvation of many. I challenge you to be a servant today. Father, I just thank you for everyone here. I thank you for the precious sisters. I pray for supernatural miracles in their life. I pray that you would give them opportunities to serve in ways they never thought possible, and they would be strengthened and uplifted in every single way.